Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perticchese, and thank you for joining me as always. Week 4, college football in the books. Currently recording during another doubleheader Monday Night Football to conclude Week 3 of the NFL. Lots to talk about. Big weekend of college football. Did not fail to live up to the hype. Two amazing big-time games. We saw Colorado brought back to reality a little bit. Some absolutely amazing rookie performances in the NFL. And here Saturday, Sunday, we're going to break it all down. We're going to do the NFL draft report with our S2S Teams of the week. We're going to do the Devy slant with our Devy team of the week. And we're going to do the NFL and NFL Dynasty fantasy reports as well. Running solo tonight. My man Jeff Abercrombie had quite the sports weekend. He was at ND, Ohio State, and then he was at Lions, Falcons the following day as well. Back-to-back big-time games there. Can't wait to Jeff's back on the air, hopefully next week. And just to feel what, watching it live, coming down to the wire, that ND, Ohio State game, was classic, instant classic right off the bat. So even though he's not here with me tonight, we'll spend maybe the opening segment, if he's with me next week, just kind of talking about what that environment was like. As someone who follows ND closely, Florida State and ND have always been my two college football teams. You guys obviously know, diehard Giants fan stuff in the NFL, but Florida State and ND are my college teams. And I really thought it was going to be a big weekend for both of them. And we're going to really put them on the map to be legitimate title contenders. But unfortunately, ND could not get the W at the end there. And Ohio State pulled it out. So let's get right into the NFL draft report for this week. We start with our S2S Teams of the week. These are the draft eligible guys. So let's get it started at the quarterback position. It was Bo Nix out of Oregon. He's the first string quarterback of the week. He beat Colorado 42-6 and helped the Oregon Ducks destroy, Coach Prime and the Buffaloes. He was 28 of 33 for 276 yards and 3 touchdowns. The first string running back of the week is Jace McClellan out of Alabama. He helped Alabama beat Ole Miss 24-10. He had 17 carries, 105 yards, and a touchdown. At the wide receiver position, back to that Oregon game, it was Troy Franklin. He had 8 catches, 126 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And our first string tight end of the week, Brock Bowers, making his debut on the S2S Teams of the week, helped Georgia easily beat UAB, 9 catches, 121 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Let's start with the Ducks. I watched that game wire to wire. It was an absolute offensive clinic by Oregon, by Bo Nix. Troy Franklin showed why he's probably in the mix to be a top 10 wide receiver in next year's draft class. One of the most exciting wide receivers in college football, especially in that offense. Bo Nix was just surgical going up and down the field. Colorado, especially without Travis Hunter, had absolutely no answers to shut down Bo Nix and, the firepower of the Oregon offense. I think now the bigger question is, I mentioned Troy Franklin. He's probably in that day 2 mix. If he doesn't go day 2, maybe the frame is a little bit of a concern. I think I still got to add like 10, 12 pounds to that frame. He's 6'3", but he's just too skinny. Like he's got to get to like 6'3", like 192, 195. And if you could do that, I think we're talking about a guy who locks himself into day 2 because he's got the explosiveness. He's got the big playability. He can win vertically down the field. He's got good ball skills. So Franklin is a guy who right now it's been about status quo in terms of his draft capital. I think he's very much in that round 3 mix, maybe, if he falls early round 4, but I think he's a day 2 guy. I think he's a guy who very much intrigues me. I think Bo Nix is an interesting because I think, we've talked so much about Caleb Williams and Drake May as 1-2. and I know I listen to the Prospect of Pros podcast every week with Dane Brugler, who I think is as good as anyone in the business. And they have a segment basically every week that just talk about who's QB Pari this week, or let's check in on QB Pari. And it's because it's going to be an ongoing thing the entire year. And I think Bo Nix is one of those guys. I'll talk about another one who I personally think should be in the mix as well. But Bo Nix is in that mix as a guy who could be QB Pari and could be a first-round pick. And that's wild to think of, where, a couple years ago when he looked like he was just going to completely flame out and not live up to the hype as that major 5-star recruit, way back when. And now rejuvenated in Oregon, now coming back to school again, when last year he probably would have been a day 2 type pick. And now he might find his way into the mix of the Heisman, into the mix of, the playoffs, if the Oregon could continue to do what they're doing. And then at the same time, also maybe catapult his draft stock to be a first-round caliber quarterback, to be that QB Pari. I know Colorado, like I said, doesn't have much defense, but this is more of a bigger picture for Bo Nix in terms of how high his draft capital could climb compared to where it was just a couple of years ago. It is kind of a wild to think of. But, to me, the command he has of that offense, it's not just even in this game. You watch him play, he looks like a different player. He doesn't even remotely resemble the player who we had so many question marks at Auburn. The inaccuracy, the ball placement, the decision making, you don't see any of that really with any type of consistency like you did, unfortunately, when he was at Auburn. He seems to have really cleaned up the issues in terms of things that we wanted to see him work and improve and development on, and he sure seems like he's done that. So I think he's going to be very much in the mix to be that QB Pari. I think he's very much in the mix to be a first-round quarterback prospect. I think he's very much in the mix to win the Heisman. So impressive performance from him. Jace McClellan, we've kind of been waiting for Alabama. They, listen, even so, Alabama's offense still not what we're accustomed to, but Jace McClellan is the guy who, shows good athleticism. He's got speed. He's got some power. McClellan is a guy who, when the year started, when the year started, he was number 10. So he was in my top 10 running backs, and this past week, I think showed, his type of talent and his type of skill level, even with Alabama's offense a little bit down this year. They really relied on him this past weekend. And like I've mentioned before, I think he's a day 3 type prospect. So I think he's more of like that round 4, round 5, but he's capable of playing on all 3 downs. He can run inside, he can run outside, he can run gap, he can run zone, so that's an intriguing skill set for somebody. So we'll see if he can kind of use this week as a little bit of a momentum to kind of see his draft stock kind of solidify. It's either an early day Pari, or with the Alabama bump, could he even move up? That'll be something that we'll follow closely. But he was our RB1 of this week. And then the tight end, Brock Bowers, listen, there's not much to say. I think the question mark is how high does he go? Even as we've seen question marks about Kyle Pitts, is he ever going to live up to the draft capital, that people used on him, right? Like legitimate questions, right? He was taken, ahead of, flat out superstars, right? He was taken, ahead of guys like Devonta Smith and Jalen Waddle and so many other elite playmakers in that class. And now, where does Brock Bowers lie? Is he top 5? I doubt it. Is he top 10? Maybe. Is he top 15? Yeah, I kind of feel like I think his sweet spot's going to be somewhere in that 11 to 15 range, based on how many quarterbacks, and we'll see. But I think right now I would say I feel pretty confident he'll go in the top 15. Could he push his way into the back end of top 10? I don't think it's impossible, but we'll see. So if we go to the second string team of the week, at the quarterback, it's Jordan Travis out of Florida State. He beat Clemson 31-24 in overtime. He was 21 of 37, 289 yards, 2 touchdowns. Also showed his athleticism, his running ability in terms of the mobility to move around the pocket, playoff structure. Impressive win for Florida State, an impressive game for Jordan Travis. The second string running back of the week was Travion Henderson out of Ohio State. He helped Ohio State beat ND 17-14. He had 14 carries, 104 yards, and a touchdown. Keon Coleman back in that Florida State game. He was the second string wide receiver of the week, 5 catches, 86 yards, 2 touchdowns, and helping Florida State beat Clemson, one of their biggest wins in years. And then at the tight end position, Jatavian Sanders out of Texas helped easily the Longhorns beat Baylor 38-6. He had another 5 catches, 110 yards. He's putting up receiving production on that level, like consistently. And for a tight end, that's remarkable. Listen, Jordan Travis, I mentioned before, Bo Nix and QB3. I think Jordan Travis is in the mix. I think he very much could be in the mix to be QB3 in this class. I think he does. When I watch him play, like this is a lot of. I compared him before the season started. I said, listen, last year I said that Jaron Hall was like the discount version of Bryce Young. I think Jordan Travis falls between Jaron Hall and Bryce Young last year in terms of how much I like them. I like them way more than Jaron Hall, not as much as obviously as Bryce Young. But I think as Florida State continues to have this year, that I think there's a legit chance they're favored every game the rest of the year. Obviously they have games against Miami. That's a dangerous game, big rivalry. They have a game against Florida, big rivalry. And then they have a game against Duke, which, as we've seen, they're not a pushover this year, but they're going to be favored in every game. If they can take care of business, I think you're going to be seeing Florida State, in the playoff picture, and that's going to give Jordan Travis a lot of spotlight to continue to rise his draft capital, and the stardom on him is going to have a chance to really shine during this process. Listen, I just think the combination of athleticism, mobility, playing off structure, arm talent, accuracy, and ball placement, there's a lot to like about Jordan Travis. And he's finally putting it together. He's finally showing more consistency at times this year. And now we're seeing him make big plays in big moments. And I think that, speaks volumes on Jordan Travis. This is now, earlier in the year, we saw a big performance from him in a big spot. If they started out really sluggish that first opener game, and now this past week against Clemson, we're seeing him rise up to the occasion. Travion Henderson still right in the mix to potentially be RB1 in this class. I think it's wide open. I know I like Trey Benson a lot before the season started, but he has really not shown me nearly as much in the early going for Florida State this year. So I can't think it's him. So you're talking after that, it's Blake Corum, his teammate Donovan Edwards, but Blake Corum's clearly outplayed him. Then you go down to, Braylon Allen and Raheem Sanders and Travion Henderson, and if it's not Blake Corum right now, it might still be Travion Henderson. If it's not, one of the bigger guys in Sanders or Allen right now. So it's Henderson, had that big play, that long touchdown, showing that speed, showing that explosion, showing that athleticism that we haven't seen as much since that freshman year, when he just looked like he was going to be locked in to be like RB1 whenever he was draft eligible. And here we are. But he still has big play ability. He still has explosiveness. He's got that burst. He's got that acceleration. I think Henderson's going to be very much in the mix to be top 3, top 5, maybe even top 1 running back in the 2024 draft class. And Keon Coleman, listen, I think now the question starts to become, Keon Coleman is can he push Emeka Egbuka? Can he push Malik Neighbors? Can he push those guys to be wide receiver 2 in this class? Because I think he's in the mix. I truly believe he's already now in that 4 hole with those guys. If you want to say Harrison Jr., Egbuka, Malik Neighbors in some order as your 1, 2, 3, then I think Coleman is right there. But I think Coleman offers a skill set on the outside that is different than Neighbors, is different than Egbuka. So, if a team wants that inside-outside versatility, after Marvin Harrison Jr., listen, I can get it then. Emeka Egbuka is your guy. Malik Neighbors offers that inside-outside versatility. But if you want a true outside-the-numbers wide receiver with big playability, the prototype, that might be Keon Coleman. Like he's a special player, and we're seeing it. And I talked about Jordan Travis is going to get a lot of opportunity this year to shine. So is Keon Coleman in these big spots. I think the gap between him and Johnny Wilson, his teammate, is already widening as I watch these guys. I like Johnny Wilson as a prospect, but I think he's more of a round 3, early round 4 guy. I think he's round 3. I think other people might even think round 4. But I think Keon Coleman, to me, Sharpie it in, like I said, after his opening week performance, he's going round 1. Wide receivers with that speed, with that athleticism, with that ball skills, they're going round 1. As Jeff pointed out, in the beginning of the year, yeah, we want to see development. We want to see growth. We want to see refinement for sure. But Coleman right now, really impressive for sure. A couple honorable mentions before we transition to the Devy report with the S2S Devy team of the week. Marshawn Lloyd out of USC helped the Trojans easily beat up Arizona State 42-28. He had 14 carries for a $154 and a touchdown. Formerly of South Carolina, transferred there. Going to get every opportunity in that high-powered offense, put together a really good statistical year, and I think see him solidify a draft spot, somewhere on day 3. And then we talked about him, had to talk about him again. Rome Odunze out of Washington. The Huskies just continue to roll on offense. Michael Penix continues to roll at the quarterback position. And Odunze, 5 catches, 122 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He's the guy that makes up the rest of my top 5, right? We talked about Marvin Harrison. I mentioned Egbuka before. I mentioned Neighbors. We mentioned Keon Coleman. Rome Odunze is my guy. He's my other guy who's in my top 5. It's going to be hard-pressed for somebody to crack that top 5 that is not those guys. If they all declare, for me, it's a clear drop after them. I like Xavier Worthy, but to me, he's not on the level of the guys in my top 5. And then we start talking about guys like Johnny Wilson, J. Michael Sturdivant, Jalen McMillan, Malachi Corley. But to me, the top 5, and then Worthy is kind of just almost in his own tier. The top 5 to me very much solidified. I'm not sure. I'm going to come off of that 5-pack, we'll say, and Harrison, Neighbors, Coleman, Egbuka, and Odunze. To me, if they're all in it, they're going to be my top 5 wide receivers. I'd be surprised if somebody catapults over them. That's how much I really like that. And usually the wide receiver position, I feel like there's a lot of movement and a lot of up and down. But these 5 guys, I really feel strong about. These guys are round 1 caliber players. We have size in this mix between Harrison and Coleman and Odunze. We haven't had guys like that in round 1 with outside prototypes in a while. And the Neighbors and the Egbuka are a little bit more of what we've had over the last couple years. But even them, I think they offer way more inside-outside versatility than like the most recent class with like Addison and Flowers and those guys. So it'll be interesting to kind of follow this wide receiver group for sure. Let's take this to the Devy slant where we give our S2S Devy team of the week. I got a quarterback, running back, and wide receiver. Nothing really stood out at the tight end position, so I wasn't going to force it. At the quarterback position, listen, we could have went Drew Allar out of Penn State. They had a great performance against Iowa. He had 4 touchdowns. Could have went Cabe Klubnik out of Clemson, who almost pulled off the win against Florida State. But I wanted to bring up Jalen Milroe out of Alabama. Helped Alabama beat Ole Miss. He got the starting job back. He went 17 of 21, 225 yards, also showed his, athleticism, 28 yards rushing. I want to bring him to the forefront because I feel like, it's been a rough start for Alabama. It's not all on Milroe's, plate. I think he's still a guy who I think we're going to hear from in the Devy community. I think he's a guy that we're going to see growth and development. And, he's a guy who can run. He's got the athleticism and the arm talent. So Jalen Milroe is a guy who, he's not looked at as like a top Devy guy for sure. But I think he was really solid this past week in finally giving Alabama a good quarterback performance and to kind of introduce him to the show a little bit and bring up a new name. That's where I went at the quarterback position. The running back of the week on the S2S Devy team of the week is a Penn State underclassman, but it's not the guy who most expect, Nicholas Singleton. It's Katron Allen. He had 21 carries for 72 yards, but more big picture. Singleton has not been the workhorse. Allen, while he might not be near the top of Devy running back ranks, like his, running mate there in Singleton, Allen is a guy that is well regarded in the Devy community as well. And I thought it was worth putting him on the list here to acknowledge that he has 280 yards rushing already and 2 touchdowns. And that's playing together, with Singleton, as the guy who, most look at as the, arguably the top running back in all of Devy, Nicholas Singleton. Katron Allen is number 11 for me. And I always skew more towards the guys who are draft eligible. So, in that top 11, there's only 3 that are draft eligible: Nicholas Singleton, Branson Robinson out of Georgia, and Katron Allen out of Penn State. That just shows you, the thought process there a little bit for sure. If we take this now away from, and then the wide receiver, for the Devy team of the week is again Luther Burden out of Missouri. What more to say? 34-27 win over Kentucky. 10 catches, over 170 yards. Just continues to show why he is one of the top Devy wide receivers in the nation. For me, he's number 6 right now. But again, that's kind of skewing towards the draft guys. So I have the top 4 from this draft class. Then I have, Evan Stewart at 5, Luther Burden at 6, and then Roma Dunes at 7, and then Tet McMillan, who we talked about last week, at 8, and then Zachariah Branch at 9, Travis Hunter. It's kind of like a little insight there to my top 10 Devy wide receivers. But Burden is a guy that he's going to be looked at as stone cold lock, round 1 type talent when he is draft eligible for sure. So let's take it away from the college game. A lot to talk about there. We talked about them for about 20 minutes. So let's take it to the NFL side of this. And let's start with the NFL rookie report for week 3. CJ Stroud leads the Texans to a big time win over Jacksonville. He was 20 of 30, 280 yards and 2 touchdowns. All the narrative around CJ Stroud, it almost seems laughable at how good he's looked. And remember, here at Saturday Sunday, we talked about it. That performance against Georgia, to me, just elevated what I thought about CJ Stroud, because I loved the passing ability. I thought he was the best natural passer in this group. When you combine, ball placement, accuracy, arm talent, and size, frame. But that game against Georgia last year in the playoffs, to me, just showed a more complete player, a guy that could play when his offensive line didn't make things perfect for him, which it usually was at Ohio State. And I think that's what we're seeing here. The Texans' offensive line has been decimated by injuries, but it has not slowed down CJ Stroud at all. He has risen up. They feel comfortable putting a lot on his plate, and he is just delivering pass after pass, big time pass after big time pass, and keeping the Texans in games. And then this past week, getting a big win over Jacksonville, where they were I believe they were 8 or 9 point underdogs. It's been a really impressive start to CJ Stroud's career. On the flip side, Bryce Young missed this game due to injury. He has not looked like the player that we've seen in Alabama. Now, I know it's really early. He seems really small out there. And I know I heard the guys over at Established Run, Evan Silva, Leviton, they've said it as well. It's noticeable. He looks really small out there. And then maybe it's just because he's not delivering right now. Their wide receivers are shaky, but it's not like CJ Stroud's in this ideal, pristine, situation. Terrible offensive line. Wide receivers are, he's got a young one I'm going to talk about momentarily, and another relatively young player, Nico Collins, but it's not like he's sitting there playing with Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson. So yeah, you could talk about the wide receivers from Houston, to Carolina. And yeah, the Houston ones I think are a little better, but that Stroud's dealing with a lot of adversity too. And he's rising up. And right now he looks like the one who has transitioned way faster from the Saturday game to the Sunday game, than his running mate there, Bryce Young. The running back position, this was the week. For a year plus here at Saturday Sunday, we talked about Devin Achane. And we talked about how special of a player we thought he can be. I said, to me, he reminded me so much, of CJ Johnson, Chris Johnson, see the explosiveness, the burst, the acceleration, big play waiting to happen. I didn't care about the size and the frame. We live in a different world with a different NFL than we did 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. In today's NFL, Devin Achane works. And what we saw this past week, 18 carries for 203 yards and 2 touchdowns, 4 catches for 30 yards and 2 more touchdowns in his first real extensive use of work. He went for 233 total yards and 4 touchdowns. We said it on draft weekend. There wasn't one pick out of, I think, the 250, whatever there was, 8, 9, whatever it was this year. There wasn't one other pick in the entire draft that was a more perfect marriage between player and team scheme. And that was this. Mike McDaniel, that Dolphins, formerly of the 49ers, outside zone run scheme. You add Devin Achane to Mike McDaniel's play calling, that run scheme with the speed that Waddle and Hill possess and what that does to a defense, and you throw Devin A-Chain, they dropped a 70 spot on another NFL team this weekend, Denver Broncos, and it was without Jalen Waddle there. You are not going to be able to give Devin A-Chain much attention, because if you do, Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill are going to make you pay. And then when you do worry so much about them, it's going to be Devin A-Chain is going to be the guy. All he needs is 10 to 13 touches a week. And you're talking about an impactful fantasy player. That's why I was on record as saying, I thought he should have been an early second round pick. Early second round were similar to where Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker went the year before. And two, I said he was the clear RB3, and he was closer to Jahmyr Gibbs than anybody was to him. I think we've already seen it, and I don't think it's even going to be close. The talent disparity between Devin A-Chain and Zach Charbonnet and Kendre Miller or anybody else is going to be stark. Charbonnet, there's Zach Charbonnet's, and I like him, the player, solid player, but there's Zach Charbonnet's every draft class. There's Kendre Miller's every draft class. Guys that profile somewhat similarly. Devin A-Chains, they are not Devin A-Chains, not with his explosion, acceleration, burst. What we saw at Texas A&M last year was a guy who could handle workload, run between the tackles, be more physical than we even gave him credit for, make people miss in the open field, footwork, the agility, the elusiveness. You combine all that where he is, stock up on Devin A-Chain. If anybody's still a doubter, go buy him in your league. Don't sell low on him, because we're talking about a guy who is going to be in that offense where they know how to scheme guys up and they know how to maximize strengths. He could be a flat out superstar in that offense. And I thought it might take him half a year to really get consistent touches. That's out the window now. You don't put up 233 all-purpose yards on 22 touches and then go back to getting 4 touches a week. You just don't do it. So unbelievable Devin A-Chain at the wide receiver position. Tank Dell. We talked about CJ Stroud. Now Tank Dell. 5 catches, 145 yards, and 1 touchdown. This wide receiver class is turning into a spectacular group. Puka Nacua and Tank Dell. We're talking a late 3rd round and a 5th round pick. They're exploding onto the scene. Zay Flowers has been unbelievable. Jordan Addison's looked good. We haven't even seen Jackson Smith-Njigba do anything yet. Jalen Hyatt barely plays, and when he's done, he's made 2 impactful plays for the Giants. Marvin Mims not playing a lot. This wide receiver class has turned into a special group. Every year we just get these wide receiver groups, and I had my reservations about how impactful they could be, but now, wow, Tank Dell. Right now, I had my questions about Quentin Johnson. We're going to talk about him momentarily here in the Dynasty Report. But Tank Dell, give me Tank Dell over Quentin Johnston. I've already seen enough. I have my reservations about Quentin Johnston. I think they're going to come to fruition. And even if he outplays what I expect of him, I still have my reservations on how the impact he's going to make. I think Tank Dell is going to make as much of an impact as guys like Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison. That's what I think of him right now. He's playing outside. They said from the minute they drafted him, they looked at him as more like a Hollywood Brown with inside outside versatility who can play on the outside. He's not a gadget player. He's a legitimate outside wide receiver for them right now who kicks inside, can be a vertical slot. You can't cover him. I don't care about his size. So stock up on Tank Dell. I'd buy him if people are still have reservations about the size. You can't cover him. You can't cover him. The connection him and CJ Stroud have is already special. And then tight end position, Sam Laporta, 8 catches, 84 yards, and a touchdown. I'm going to bring him up in the section in the Dynasty Report as well. But Sam Laporta, I mean, this guy, we don't see rookie tight ends usually do this. He's very much involved. We'll see if it changes a lot when Jameson Williams comes back from the suspension. But I mean, right now, the cat's kind of out of the bag with Laporta too. Like, he's an integral part of that team. We have not seen anything of Michael Mayer right now. Laporta's been balling out. Kincaid's had moments. Musgrave's a integral part of the Green Bay pass offense, even though they just haven't had to put up a lot of volume there yet. This tight end class is looking star-studded, but Laporta right now, looks like on a trajectory. I think the question is more how high can he push himself into the dynasty tight end ranks? And I think it's a valid question. I'm going to kind of use that as my jumping off point to transition over to the NFL Fantasy Dynasty Report for the week. These rookie tight ends, Laporta and Kincaid in particular, I think they have a legit chance sooner rather than later to jump into the top 5, 6 of dynasty tight end rankings. I think most people's tight end rankings probably had them in like the 8, 9, or 10 range, maybe 11, somewhere between 8 and 11 before the season started. I think now you're talking about how high could they go? Because there's question marks all over the place. Goddard is older than we think because he waited behind Zach Ertz for that long. He's not locked into a huge role because I think the offense is going to run for A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith for the foreseeable future. And by the time it doesn't, Goddard's going to be a much older player. So I think you could make the case sooner rather than later that Laporta and Kincaid deserve to be over Dallas Goedert. Darren Waller, we expected for Darren Waller to be above those guys. He needed 1 or 2 star-studded years. Now, right now, Giants have a lot of issues going on. I still think Darren Waller is going to put together a productive year. But if these O-line issues, if Daniel Jones continues to have no time or he continues to struggle, Darren Waller might not have that top 3, top 4 tight end year. And that was the reason why you would have had him ahead of Sam Laporta and Dalton Kincaid, because you were banking on Darren Waller being elite this year and maybe next year before the age really started to set in. So there, George Kittle. He's soon to be 30 years old. There's limited volume to go around there. Like this week, he looked really good, but Brandon Ayuk was out, right? So I think there's question marks on how much longer should George Kittle be above these guys. And then Kyle Pitts. Like, are we so sure Kyle Pitts is a better player than Sam Laporta and Dalton Kincaid? We know what he did his rookie year. But this is now 2 years later. They don't seem to want to use him a lot. They seem to be taking him off the field for more snaps than we expected at times. He doesn't get the target share that we thought. So, like, yeah, I understand where he was taken, and that's why I think he's still ahead for some people. But how much longer? So that's what I'm saying. I think you look at a scenario where these guys, Laporta and Kincaid, for now, let's see some more statistical numbers before we talk about Musgrave up in this next tier. I think he's definitely in the low tight end mix right now. But, like, it might not be that far off of Laporta and Kincaid being looked at as 2 top 5 or top 6, overall dynasty tight ends. And that's remarkable coming from one draft class. And these guys were second round. Kincaid went in the round 1, in the 20s, and then Laporta went early second round. And they have transitioned very fast to being integral parts of their team's pass offense. So I think that's something that speaks volumes. Other things I want to talk about in the NFL Dynasty Report: Mike Williams, unfortunately, torn ACL. Really hurts his dynasty stock. There's no way around it. He has 1 year left on his contract, but the Chargers can get out relatively easy without much of a cap hit. They might easily do that, and then maybe he comes back on some type of other deal off the injury. But I think the writing's on the wall, especially with the drafting of Quentin Johnston in round 1. Mike Williams is already 28 years old, so we're talking age 29 next year. Coming off this ACL injury, I think it was a big loss for Mike Williams, obviously getting hurt, but the dynasty effect of it as well is you're talking about a guy who I think really goes from maybe this year being a top 20 overall wide receiver to a guy that I think there's great questions about what does his future hold. If he leaves the Chargers, right now he's got a great setup there, great young quarterback. He might take the money coming off of this injury. He might end up on a bad team or a bad quarterback. You don't know. So I think there's a lot of question marks about Mike Williams. We'll see about Quentin Johnston. Can he show off like we've seen so many of these young wide receivers from this rookie class? I have my reservations. I think he could be okay. I think he could be average to good. I don't think I don't see a superstar. I didn't see a superstar in college. I didn't see him constantly live up, to that size and frame. And I had a lot of concerns about route running and some, drops and stuff. So we'll see. He's going to get every opportunity, but right now he's not even ahead of Josh Palmer. I would expect that to change pretty soon. The Chargers should expect it to change pretty soon when you're talking about a guy they drafted as high as they did in Johnston. The quarterback position, I think we talked about the Justin Fields thing last week, so I'm not going to get into it. But I think it's also a little bit time to talk about his cohort from that draft class, and that was Trevor Lawrence, right? Listen, Trevor Lawrence has been good, but he hasn't been great yet in the NFL. He hasn't been an elite player yet. He's been a good player. We kind of threw out that first year with Urban Meyer. Last year things kind of started to settle back in, and I think everyone this year thought he was going to take that next step. And I'm not sure. Like, I think he can. I believe in the player. But, like, this past week, like, a game against the Texans, he can't lose that game. If you're an elite quarterback, you're playing a team that that is inferior to you. And Trevor Lawrence just hasn't really been that good this year. I mean, Calvin Ridley made him look great the first week of the season. But since then, like, there's been a lot of like inconsistency with Trevor Lawrence. We haven't seen that. So yeah, I think he's always going to be a good fantasy player. I just think a lot of people, myself included, that maybe we'd start to see him take steps this year to be a great fantasy player. And I think now we're starting to have questions. Like last week, I moved Anthony Richardson above Justin Fields. This week, I'm moving Anthony Richardson, who didn't even play this week due to a concussion, above Trevor Lawrence. Because I don't know. I think the ceiling for Anthony Richardson is just higher than those two, especially in the fantasy realm. And we need to see Trevor Lawrence take the next step and be then what Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert are in the NFL. And I think he can still do that. And if he can do that, then maybe he recatapults over Anthony Richardson until we see more out of Richardson. But I thought he was going to hit the ground running this year. And I thought we were going to see Trevor Lawrence resemble like peak Justin Herbert, peak Joe Burrow in terms of what we were going to see from him. We just haven't seen it yet. And then on the other side, Kenneth Walker's dynasty value last year when the season ended was probably somewhere in that like top 5 to 8 dynasty running back. And again, it all depends on, how people, do they have guys like Saquon Barkley or Austin Eckler, ahead of younger guys, I think is the question. But Kenneth Walker was in the mix to be a top 5, top 8 dynasty running back. I thought he was unbelievable last year. And then obviously people were scared off by the Zach Charbonnet pick. And listen, I was never a Charbonnet guy. I thought he was a good player, not a great player. I thought he was a late round 3, early round 4 pick. And then Charbonnet gets taken in the second round. And then the questions on Kenneth Walker start to come out there. And to me, the talent gap is so wide between those players. So wide. Zach Charbonnet is a between the tackles, thumper, physical guy. To me, he's not all that different than Brian Robinson, Dameon Pierce. Nice player. Zach Charbonnet can do what Dameon Pierce did last year. He can do what Brian Robinson's doing this year. I have little doubt. I actually think I even like Charbonnet a tad more than those guys. And that's fine. But to me, Zach Charbonnet is much closer to Brian Robinson, Dameon Pierce, A.J. Dillon. This year he's looked really bad, Dillon, but earlier in his career, I thought he was fine. Kenneth Walker is a totally different player. Kenneth Walker is an explosive back with elite burst, acceleration, speed, home run threat. He's not even the talent gap between those two guys is wide, in my opinion. And right now, I think Kenneth Walker is just ripping it open to even be wider. And I'm not sure and without an injury, I'm not so sure how much Zach Charbonnet is going to start eating into him. I know Kenneth Walker has had some inefficiencies here or there, but the explosive player that he is, I think, keeps him such a wider gap. Zach Charbonnet is not going to have the explosive big runs, not the NFL. In college, sure, UCLA had gaping wide lanes to run through. Nobody in the Pac-12 plays defense. It's not going to be like that in the NFL. But Kenneth Walker is he's as gifted and as talented. He's in the mix to be top 5, top 6 most talented running backs in football. Zach Charbonnet is never going to be that, in my opinion, just based on his natural traits. So Kenneth Walker is a guy, if there are still people even remotely concerned about Zach Charbonnet maybe hurting Kenneth Walker's value, I'd start to appropriately value Kenneth Walker as a top 8 to 10 dynasty running back with upside to even go higher. I'd be valuing him that way and going to get him if the guy who has him is not because he's scared of Zach Charbonnet. That would be my take for that. So there it is, guys. NFL Dynasty Fantasy Report for this week. NFL Rookie Report on top of the NFL Draft Rookie Report and Devy Slant with our S2S Teams of the Week for Week 4. If you're enjoying this coverage, please get over to our website, S2S Football. Fastest and easiest way to get there. For $9.99, you can get all our premium content. The S2S scouting notebook with almost 100 detailed player profiles, strengths, weaknesses, fundamental areas, developmental areas, NFL roles, scheme fit, fantasy spin. You get our NFL, you get the S2S rankings notebook, all our different types of rankings, draft eligible, Devy, NFL rookie rankings, overall positional dynasty rankings. And then in April, you get the NFL draft projections notebook as well. Best way to support the show, help us to continue to do what we do here at Saturday to Sunday. So on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nicano, and myself, thank you for joining us. And we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.